Good morning, fourth grade, and welcome back. Today we're going to be reading chapters 23 through 25 of our book, Holes. And today in the book, you're going to notice that the chapters flip back and forth between flashbacks and current day. So the first few chapters are going to be us back 100 years ago at Camp Green Lake when it was actually a populated town, and then it'll kind of jump back into where Stanley is at now. We're going to find out a little bit more about that backstory as we kind of start to piece together why these boys are digging the holes that they're digging. So let's get started. Chapter 23. 110 years ago, Green Lake was the largest lake in Texas. It was full of clear, cool water, and it sparkled like a giant emerald in the sun. It was especially beautiful in the spring when the peach trees, which lined the shores, bloomed with pink and rose-colored blossoms. There was always a town picnic on the 4th of July. They'd play games, dance, and sing and swim on the lake to keep cool. Prizes were awarded for the best peach pie and the best peach jam. A special prize was given every year to Miss Catherine Barlow for her fabulous spiced peaches. No one even tried to make spiced peaches because they knew none could be as delicious as hers. Every summer, Miss Catherine would pick bushels of peaches and preserve them in jars with cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, and other spices where she kept secret. The jarred peaches would last all winter. They probably would have lasted a lot longer than that, but they were always eaten by the end of the winter. This jar right here, these are peaches. So these peaches, it might just seem like we're just kind of mentioning them right now, but as we go further in the story, we're going to have a lot more significance to what these peaches mean to us. So let's keep going. It was said that Green Lake was heaven on earth and that Mrs. Catherine's spiced peaches were food for the angels. Catherine Barlow was the town's only school teacher. She taught in a one-room schoolhouse. It was old even then. The roof leaked, the windows wouldn't open, the door hung crooked on its bent hinges. She was a wonderful teacher, full of knowledge and full of life. The children loved her. She taught classes in the evening for adults, and many of the adults loved her as well. She was very pretty. Her classes were often full of young men who were a lot more interested in the teacher than they were in getting an education. But all they ever got was an education. One such man was Trout Walker. His real name was Charles Walker, but everyone called him Trout because his 2 feet smelled like a couple of dead fish. This wasn't entirely Trout's fault. He had an incurable foot fungus. In fact, it was the same foot fungus that had 110 years later would afflict the famous ball player Clyde Livingston. But at least Clyde Livingston showered every day. "I take a bath every Sunday morning," Trout would brag, "whether I need to or not." Most everyone in the town of Green Lake expected Miss Catherine to marry Trout Walker. He was the son of the richest man in the country. His family owned most of the peach trees and all the land on the east side of the lake. Trout often showed up at night school, but never paid attention. He talked in class and was disrespectful of the students around him. He was loud and stupid. A lot of the men in town were not educated. That didn't bother Miss Catherine. She knew they'd spent most of their lives working on farms and ranches and hadn't had much schooling. That's why she was there, to teach them. But Trout didn't want to learn. He just seemed proud of his stupidity. "How'd you like to take a ride on my new boat this Saturday?" he asked her one evening after class. "No, thank you," said Miss Catherine. "We've got a brand new boat," he said. "You don't even have to row it." "Yes, I know," said Miss Catherine. Everyone in the town had seen and heard the Walkers' new boat. It made a horrible loud noise and spewed ugly black smoke over the beautiful lake. Trout had always gotten everything he ever wanted. He found it hard to believe that Miss Catherine had turned him down. He'd point his finger at her to say, "No one says no to Charles Walker." "I believe I just did," said Catherine Barlow. Chapter 24. Stanley was half asleep when he got in line for breakfast, but the sight of Mr. Sir awakened him. The left side of Mr. Sir's face had swollen to the size of a cantaloupe. There were 3 dark purple jagged lines running down his neck, where the warden had scratched him. The other boys in Stanley's tent had obviously seen Mr. Sir as well, but they had the good sense to not say anything. Stanley put a carton of juice and a plastic spoon on its tray. He kept his eyes down and barely breathed as Mr. Sir ladled some oatmeal-like stuff into his bowl. He brought his tray from the table. Behind him, a boy from one of the other tents said, "Hey, what happened to your face?" There was a crash. Stanley turned to see Mr. Sir holding the boy's head against the oatmeal pot. "Is something wrong with my face?" The boy tried to speak but couldn't. Mr. Sir had him by the throat. "Does anyone see anything wrong with my face?" asked Mr. Sir as he continued to choke the boy. No one said anything. Mr. Sir let the boy go. His head banged against the table as he fell to the ground. Mr. Sir stood over him and asked, "How does my face look to you now?" A gurgling sound came out of the boy's mouth, and he managed to gasp the word, "Fine." "I'm kind of handsome, don't you think?" "Yes, Mr. Sir." Out on the lake, the other boys asked Stanley what he knew about Mr. Sir's face, but he just shrugged and dug his hole. If he didn't talk about it, maybe it would go away. He worked hard and fast as he could, not trying to pace himself. He just wanted to get off the lake and away from Mr. Sir as soon as possible. Besides, he knew he'd get a break. Whenever you're ready, just let me know, Zero said. The first time the water truck came, it was driven by Mr. Panansky. The second time, Mr. Sir was driving. No one said anything except thank you, Mr. Sir, as he filled each canteen. No one had even dared look at his grotesque face. As Stanley waited, he ran his tongue over the roof of his mouth and inside his cheeks. His mouth was as dry as parched as the lake. His mouth was as dry and as parched as the lake. I apologize. The bright sun reflected off the side mirror of the truck, and Stanley had to shield his eyes with his hand. Thank you, Mr. Sir, said Magnet. You thirsty, caveman? Mr. Sir asked. Yes, Mr. Sir, Stanley said, handing his canteen to him. Mr. Sir opened the nozzle and the water flowed out of the tank, but it did not go into Stanley's canteen. Instead, he held the canteen right next to the stream of water. Stanley watched the water splatter on the dirt, where it was quickly absorbed by the thirsty ground. Mr. Sir let the water run for about 30 seconds, then stopped. You want more? He asked. Stanley didn't say anything. Mr. Sir turned the water back on, and again Stanley watched it pour into the dirt. There, that should be plenty. He handed Stanley his empty canteen. Stanley stared at the dark spot on the ground, which quickly shrank before his eyes. Thank you, Mr. Sir, he said. Chapter 25. There was a doctor in the town of Green Lake 110 years ago. His name was Dr. Hawthorne, but whenever people got sick, they would go see Doc Hawthorne. But they would also see Sam, the Onion Man. Onions! Sweet, fresh onions, Sam would call as he and his donkey Mary Lou walked up and down the dirt roads of Green Lake. Mary Lou pulled a cart full of onions. Sam's onion field was somewhere on the other side of the lake. Once or twice a week, he would row across the lake and pick a new batch to fill the cart. Sam had big, strong arms, but it would still take all day for him to row across the lake and on to another day for him to return. Most of the time, he would leave Mary Lou in a shed, which the walkers let him use at no charge. But sometimes he had to take Mary Lou on his boat with him. Sam claimed that Mary Lou was almost 50 years old, which was, and still is, extraordinarily old for a donkey. She eats nothing but raw onions, Sam would say, holding up a white onion between his dark fingers. It's nature's magic vegetable. If a person ate nothing but raw onions, he could live to be 200 years old. Sam was not much older than 20, so nobody was quite sure that Mary Lou was really as old as he said she was. How would he know? Still, nobody ever argued with Sam, and whenever they were sick, they would go not only to Doc Hawthorne, but also to Sam. Sam always gave the same advice. Eat plenty of onions. He said that onions were good for digestion, but the liver, the stomach, the lungs, the heart, and the brain. If you don't believe me, just look at Mary Lou here. She's never been sick a day in her life. He also had many different ointments, lotions, syrups, and pastes that he all made out of onion juice and different parts of the onion plant. This one cured asthma. This one was for warts and pimples. This one was a remedy for arthritis. He even had a special ointment which he claimed would cure baldness. Just rub it on your husband's head every night when he's sleeping, Mrs. Collingwood, and soon his hair will be slick and as thick as Mary Lou's tail. Doc Hawthorne did not resent Sam. The folks of Green Lake were afraid to take chances. They would get regular medicine from Doc Hawthorne and onion concoctions from Sam. After they got over the illness, no one could be sure, but not even Doc Hawthorne, which of the two treatments had done the trick. Doc Hawthorne was almost bald, and in the morning his head often smelled like onions. Whenever Catherine Barlow bought onions, she always bought an extra one or two and would let Mary Lou eat them out of her hand. Is something wrong? Sam asked one day, as she was feeding Mary Lou. You seem distracted. Oh, just the weather, said Miss Catherine. It looks like rain clouds moving in. Me and Mary Lou, we like the rain, said Sam. Oh, I like it fine, said Catherine. It's just that the roof leaks in the schoolhouse. I can fix that, said Sam. What are you going to do? Catherine joked. Fill the hole with onion paste? Sam laughed. I'm good with my hands, he told her. I built my own boat. If it leaked, I'd be in big trouble. Catherine couldn't help but notice his strong, firm hands. They made a deal. He agreed to fix the leaky roof in exchange for 6 jars of spiced peaches. It took Sam a week to fix the roof because he only worked in the afternoons, after school let out, and before the night classes began. Sam wasn't allowed to attend classes because he was a black man, but they let him fix the building. Miss Catherine usually stayed in the schoolhouse, grading papers and such, while Sam worked on the roof. She enjoyed what little conversation they were able to have, shouting up and down to each other. She was surprised by his interest in poetry. When he took a break, he would sometimes read a poem to him. On more than one occasion, she would start to read a poem by Poet Longfellow, only to hear him finish it for her from memory. She was sad when the roof was finished. Is something wrong? He asked. No, you did a wonderful job, she said. It's just that the windows won't open. The children and I would enjoy a breeze now and then. I can fix that, said Sam. She gave him 2 more jars of peaches, and Sam fixed the windows. It was easier to talk to him when he was working on the windows. He told her about his secret onion field on the other side of the lake, where the onions grow all year round and the water runs uphill. When the windows were fixed, she complained that her desk wobbled. "I can fix that," said Sam. The next time she saw him, she mentioned that the door doesn't hang straight, and he got to spend another afternoon with him while he fixed that door. By the end of the first semester, Onion Sam had turned the rundown schoolhouse into a well-crafted, freshly painted jewel of a building that the whole town was proud of. People passing by would stop and admire it. "That's our schoolhouse. It shows how much we value education here in Green Lake." The only person who wasn't happy with it was Miss Catherine. She brought on things that needed to be fixed. She sat at her desk one afternoon, listening to the pitter-patter of rain on the roof. No water leaked into the classroom, except for the few drops that came from her eyes. "Onions! Hi, sweet onions!" Sam called out in the street. She ran to him. She wanted to throw her arms around him, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. Instead, she hugged Marylou's neck. "Is something wrong?" he asked her. "Oh, Sam," she said, "my heart is breaking." "I could fix that," said Sam. She turned to him. He took hold of both of her hands and kissed her. Because of the rain, there was nobody else on the street. Even if there was, Catherine and Sam wouldn't have noticed. They were lost in their own world. At that moment, however, Hattie Parker stepped out of the general store. They didn't see her, but she saw them. She pointed her quivering finger in their direction and whispered, "God will punish you." So, tomorrow we are going to figure out what that punishment will be for love. So, have a good day, 4th grade.